So, recent projects and advances on Linux have made running almost all Windows apps on Linux a reality these days. You can run 99% of Windows software on Linux. There are multiple methods which we will take a look at in this video. Some are easier than others, but they all share a common theme, and that's the fact that this is all a crutch, and it will likely not help people really move to Linux, at least not the masses of Windows users. And you might say, this guy is a dummy, I can already play almost all Steam games on Linux and I can run everything I want, and that's why I moved to Linux. And you're right, I am a dummy, but also we'll see that the gaming use case is not at all the same as the apps use case, and we're just not going to talk about Steam and Proton here really. What we will look at is how you can run almost any Windows program on Linux, an app, not a game, and why it really doesn't matter for Linux adoption, even though it might help individual users. Just like our sponsor might help you move to Linux, it's Tuxedo computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed, and the reason why it could help is it just removes the headache of trying to make sure Linux runs properly on your hardware. The hardware that they sell is just designed and built to be fully compatible with Linux. They even upstream drivers to make sure that this happens. They have a big range of computers, from the smallest form factor, more affordable laptops, all the way up to super powerful gaming laptops, workstations, you name it. I only use their devices these days. Everything that you see from me, this very video, is being recorded and edited on one of their laptops. All my gaming is done on one of their desktops. They're really fantastic, and as usual, the link is down in the description. So let's begin with what is undeniably the best solution to run any Windows app on Linux, and it is Winboat. Not Winbloat, Winboat. Winbloat would be redundant. Winboat is not based on Wine, it's not based on emulation, it is not a translation layer, it is basically just a Windows virtual machine, but integrated seamlessly with your entire Linux desktop. That's where the value comes from. Applications, the Windows apps, open as regular Linux applications on your desktop. Your home folder is accessible to your Windows applications and your Linux apps, so they can go through your Linux files without any setup necessary. You don't need to copy-paste stuff or send it to yourself with emails or set it in a specific shared directory like an animal or a dual booter. It's super easy to get working once you've installed Docker and a few other things they require. Don't be scared, they have solid documentations and links to help you with that. It's just basically 3 command lines. I managed to do it in a few minutes. And as we've established in the intro, I am a dummy, so if I can do it, everyone can. The interface is also really nice and simple. You either have an app image or you have packages for Debian, Fedora, and Arch. It is a very cool project. It automates almost everything, including the Windows install itself. And after that, you can just access that Windows install from a web browser. You can install whichever application you want to run in Windows, just like if you were running a Windows VM. And then the Winboat application lets you configure everything to add the applications you need to your menu, and you just start them from there. As a result, you can now experience the joy of running Internet Explorer on Linux, or navigate using the Windows Explorer, or more likely just run Microsoft Office, Affinity, Photoshop, or whatever else you want. Except for video games or anything that requires GPU acceleration, because unfortunately, like most solutions based on VMs, you just don't have hardware acceleration. You don't have GPU pass-through, meaning every time your Windows app needs a GPU, it's just going to slow down to a crawl. So this won't be a suitable solution to run games that didn't run with Proton because, for example, of anti-cheat. It also won't be a reasonable solution for video editing, for 3D modeling, for CAD software or whatever else, but for office work, for accessing your email that only works with Exchange on Windows, for opening a few documents in Photoshop, quick edits, for opening some stuff in Affinity and making quick changes, this is all perfectly fine and it works. And everything that doesn't need a GPU will just run as well as it does on Windows, so that's good. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, first my condolences, but also you might remember my video about WinApps. It is the exact same concept, except the setup is here 100 times easier. It also supports USB pass-through, And at some point, maybe GPU pass-through will be supported, meaning you could run any Windows program with solid performance. Won't work for anti-cheat because they detect virtualization, but it would make everything finally work, which would be a great advance. And at that point, I might stop saying that running Windows apps on Linux is a crutch and not really helping. But for now, that's what it is, because you're just not getting the same experience in most programs. Now, you might wonder what the point of Winboat is compared to just running Windows in a virtual machine, because it's the same thing. The obvious here is system integration. You share your files and folders through a LAN interface in the network section of the Windows Explorer. You can launch your Windows apps from your Linux system without opening the VM itself. You don't have to switch to the Windows desktop to run them. And it's nice because the Windows desktop is it's bad. It's really bad. It's a bad desktop. So not having to interact with it unless you really need to install another app and make it available for Linux is good. You can have the best UI there is with the programs you need, and that's sort of a workable solution, sort of. Now, if you don't want to dedicate the resources needed to run an entire Windows virtual machine, though, that you sort of have to let run in the background if you want full seamless access, then there is always Wine or Proton or both. Although this solution, as it always was in the past, is still really not ready for Windows applications. We used to have solid graphical user interfaces to run Windows programs like, for example, Play on Linux, but this has been completely abandoned. Most scripts in there just don't work properly anymore. You now have another application called Bottles. Yes, I know how it sounds when I say it. You can blame my French accent for it. Bottles? I don't know. I can't make it sound like it's not the other word. Bottles gives you a full GUI to manage everything wine related, but you'll have to do the manual work to find which dependencies are needed, which configs work best, and generally this does not result in something that runs unless you can find a tutorial for a specific app. They've made good progress on that front because they launched something called Eagle, which basically analyzes the Windows executable, the exe or MSI file, and tells you which version of Proton or Wine they would recommend you to use for maximum compatibility, and also the stuff that you might want to install using Winetricks. But it's still a lot of elbow grease and manual work. It's not going to do it for you. But for example, I found a recipe that works to make Affinity run on Linux. Now, the experience here is pretty miserable. The content of the application disappears from the screen, menus blink in and out, things stutter, icons disappear. It's just not great. You'll find guides for all the versions of Microsoft Office, you'll find guides for Photoshop, you'll find guides for other applications, but these might or might not result in something that works. Some Patreon members reported that their experience with Affinity on Wine was much better than mine, so maybe it's my Nvidia GPU not working properly with Wine. I don't know. The fact of the matter is, if I depended on Affinity for my work, I would not use it on Wine because it's just not working well. It's just not usable, not as much as, for example, running it with Winboat would be, even though I don't have GPU acceleration on Winboat, where I do have it with Wine and Proton. And that's the general experience you'll have with Wine. Sometimes following a recipe will work fine and you'll have a good experience. Sometimes it won't result in the app running. And sometimes you'll follow the same recipe twice, one won't work, and the other time you do it, it will work. Your experience will always differ from the one from someone else because it's just how Wine is. It's not a reliable, pre-packaged, super supported solution. It is a hack. It is a translation layer, and it's just not working all that well for applications compared to games. Now, Bottles also has installers that you can use to automatically run and configure specific programs. The list is mostly games related, but you'll find a few things like Autodesk Fusion, FL Studio, Evernote, Ableton Live, and others. Whether these are still up to date and still work, I have no idea, and you'll have to try them for yourself if you really want to try them out. Now, you might wonder, why is it that we can run plenty of games on Linux and run them really well, sometimes with better performance than on Windows, and we can't run Windows apps, which are way more basic technically? And Windows apps are much trickier to run than Windows games, because they rely on a ton of different system libraries that Wine can or can't replicate properly compared to games, where most of the game itself is self-contained. It relies on one graphics API, which is generally DirectX. It's almost the same for almost every game. They might have quirks in how they use these APIs, that's why we have game-specific fixes, but for Windows applications, you still have those quirks for all the various APIs that Windows has to display an interface, to access the GPU, but you also have to support all the external libraries that those applications use, and this makes things way more difficult. Now, Bottles does make running those things much easier. They are doing fantastic work with their Eagle analysis tool, but in the meantime, it's still not a reliable solution to run Windows programs. It can run, sometimes you'll have a good experience, but you really would not want to base your entire livelihood on this thing. Okay, so this is all well and good, but my point was, this doesn't help Linux in the long run. It doesn't help with adoption. And you might ask, why? If I can use Winboat to run Affinity or Photoshop on Linux, then I'm moving to Linux. I'm not sticking to Windows. If I can run Affinity with Wine, then yes, I am moving to Linux. So yes, it does help with adoption. But are you moving to Linux? Really? If your income depends on a specific application and all your projects need that application to open reliably day after day, hour after hour, all features working, not more crashes than what you already have on Windows, would you really lock yourself into a position where the only barrier between being able to work and just not making any money, the only barrier is a compatibility layer that has been known to be extremely flimsy and might just break with each minor update to the application you use, to your drivers, to your OS, to the libraries in your OS, or to the translation layer itself. Of course you wouldn't lock yourself in to that. I discussed the topic with my patrons and YouTube members a while back, and they were unanimous. No one would base their income on something that's running with Wine unless that solution is officially supported by the application developer. If tomorrow Adobe says, hey, here is the Adobe Suite packaged with Wine, it is officially supported on Linux for this, and this distro, you can run it now, if you have an issue, we'll fix it, then sure, you'll base your work on Wine because, well, that's what the distributor, the software developer gives you. But if it's a hack that you do on the side, then no, you're absolutely not using it and you're not basing your entire livelihood on it. Now, if we're talking about Winboat, it is different because you are running the Windows application on Windows. So it's not likely to break at all, unless Winboat itself breaks. It's unlikely, it's just using regular VM tech and remote desktop stuff that is well proven at that point. But also, not really moving to Linux if you're using Winboat, are you? You still depend on Windows. At the minute you just stop using Windows, you don't have access to your application. If a Windows update breaks something for your app, you're still vulnerable to that. If your remote desktop protocol breaks, you're just vulnerable to that. And you just haven't really moved fully to Linux. You still depend on Windows. You're still tethered to that. So I wouldn't really say Winboat helps with Linux adoption. It helps you use Linux as your main OS, but you still depend on Windows and a Windows program. And then you might have the comparison with games, because gaming on Linux is a thing. We can run the vast majority of Windows games on Linux. And this has indeed increased Linux market share significantly. We've seen this market share in Steam rise enormously, and we've seen Linux on the desktop reach about 4% or something like that, depending on the sources, which is a huge increase over a few years. People have moved to Linux. And let's not forget, even 1% in Steam market share is about 1.3 million people. It is a huge number of people moving to Linux. It's not insignificant. But also, gaming is not work. Gaming is a hobby. At least for most of us, playing games is a recreational activity, it's not a job, which means we're more tolerant of things breaking there. If my game stops working after an update, I will rant, I will vent, I will be unhappy, but I'll wait for it to be fixed, and in the meantime I'll play something else or I'll do something else. If my video editor stops working on Linux though, I'm pretty well screwed. I can't work and I can't make money. I'll have to either relearn another video editing tool, or I'll have to move to another OS in the meantime that runs my current editor. People will not relearn a new app that is specific to the OS. They will just reinstall Windows or move back to the Windows part of their dual boot. That's 100% certain. Which brings us to the last point of the video. Wine is a crutch, Winboat is a crutch. It is very cool for us hobbyists users that like to tinker with things. It is handy in a pinch. It is nothing short of technological sorcery. You can use those solutions to quickly fix that little problem in your Photoshop project that your client has noticed and you hadn't. You can make a quick tweak in your video edit. You can do that on Linux without rebooting to Windows. It's good. Performance might be worse, the UI might slightly be off, but it is doable and you won't have to reboot. It's a cool, handy thing to have in a pinch. But doing the entire job on Linux instead of on Windows, it requires the app to run just as well as it does with all the features, with 3D acceleration, and with reliable performance, and just the fact that the app reliably opens. Right now, none of those solutions can guarantee that, either on the performance front or on the fact that the app opens and runs at all. I know you can now run Photoshop with Wine, you can now run Affinity with Wine, but would you really base your livelihood on this when things can break at an update's notice? No, you wouldn't, and so this is not helping Linux adoption in the long run. It is not as good as official support from the application's developers. So to finish up on this short video, Windows software on Linux is still a mess, and with good reason. It is not supposed to run on Linux. It was never developed to run on Linux. It never will be supposed to run on Linux. The fact we can even run something like 90% of Steam games on Linux is nothing short of a technological miracle. The fact that we can install Affinity or Photoshop or Office or whatever else on Linux is insane. But unfortunately, this doesn't really help with Linux adoption. The best solution on Linux currently is Winboat. It's a Windows VM plus remote desktop and seamless integration, as seamless as it can be. With GPU pass-through or some form of GPU acceleration in the future, maybe this will be suitable for everyone and it will become the way of bypassing the missing apps on Linux. But right now, it is not the case. This means plenty of stuff is still out of reach. And also you're running full Windows. You're giving Windows apps access to your home folder, meaning viruses, trojans, ransomware and other stuff can infect your Linux files through that Windows VM. It is not ideal, and honestly, the only real solution to make sure that people move fully to Linux is not building hacks that let them run what they run on Windows. This will help with individual users, this will help in a pinch, but this will not replace full developer support. The only way to get that developer support is to have more market share, and the problem is to have more market share, we need their apps. So as always, it's the chicken and the egg problem. But in the meantime, those solutions can help increase adoption just a teeny tiny bit, and maybe that will be enough to just push us over the edge, where at that point, maybe Adobe, maybe Microsoft, maybe Affinity start building Linux versions of their apps. Even if it's just a Windows version packaged with Wine, at least it's an officially supported version. The other only solution is to have our open source apps be the default solution. Blender managed it, they are the default 3D modeler for a lot of people. Krita almost managed it, Inkscape almost managed it as well. GIMP is also pretty popular. If we can have the same thing for LibreOffice or OnlyOffice, for our CAD software, if they can reach the state where they are good enough and powerful enough, it may be even better than their proprietary counterparts, then at that point, yes, we're getting more Linux adoption, and at that point, maybe the big name proprietary developers start porting their apps to Linux to compete. In the meantime, Winboat, Wine, these are crutches. They are going to be useful in a pinch, but they are not going to drive people to adopt Linux for work, for professional use case, or maybe even for recreational use cases. Anyway, this will conclude today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching it or listening to it. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Have you moved to Linux thanks to a program or a game running with Wine or Proton or Winboat? Would you use that for your day-to-day work or not? I personally wouldn't. Let me know what you think. And of course, you know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. They're all down underneath the video as always. Leave a comment, click them, you know why. You also have plenty of links down in the description to join our Patreons or our members on YouTube. This is a cheap membership and it gives you a daily podcast and also a patroncast as well each week where we discuss these kinds of topics. So thank you all for listening, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!